Today we will be seeing chapter 27 of Canto 3, which is entitled as Understanding Material Nature. It's a very interesting title, so we will see the details of that. As you all know, we are in the last section of Kapila Dev's teachings of the Canto 3. Especially, we are close to the exact teachings of Kapila Dev. We completed the section of Kardama Muni's life in the previous chapters from around 21, and then we got into the life of Kardama Muni from there, and then finally into Kapil Dev's teachings. Last week we saw about the details of the fundamental principles of material nature, which was an introduction to the process of Sankhya Yoga or Jnana Yoga, which Kapil Dev discussed as part of the processes for liberation. So Devahuti is going to is basically in the last chapter, if you remember, Kapil Dev completed saying that the purpose of contemplating or explaining about the Virat Rupa is to actually understand the super soul, is to actually know thus that super soul or the supreme lord is existing within everything. That is the purpose of actually speaking about the Virat Rupa. And in this chapter, he is going to continue to actually explain more about material nature, specifically about Bhakti Mishra Jnana process. Okay. Suman Prabhu's screen seems to be blank. Is everybody else able to see my screen or is it
No,
blank?
Prabhu. It is saying, gosh, you have started screen sharing, but I cannot see it.
Okay, so it's good you said now. Somehow it's showing for me. Let me again share screen. Let me
All
know
right.
if it starts.
Yeah, yeah, I can see, Prabhu.
You can see?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So sorry for that. I didn't know that. It showed to me that it's sharing the screen. Okay. So now we will be discussing today about the Bhakti Mishra Jnana process. That's what is last we in the last chapters, especially the chapter 25, Kapil Dev discussed about the process of devotional service, which is primarily hearing, chanting, and in that through that process, one is becoming liberated from the material nature. And the other processes are also given for the sake of liberation from material nature, which includes Jnana Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga, both. But we also saw in the previous chapters what is the difference. Even though all these processes are mentioned to be processes for liberation, there is a huge difference between these three, especially between bhakti and the other two processes. The difference is liberation from material bondage is not the goal of bhakti, it's a byproduct of the process of bhakti yoga. Whereas liberation from material nature is the goal of the processes of jnana and ashtanga yogas. Whereas in the process of bhakti, developing love for the supreme lord is the focus, and the liberation from material bondage is a byproduct. Srila Jiva Goswami gives a very nice example in this context. He explains how if someone cooks a very nice sweet rice for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord and makes an offering, he will get to eat the sweet rice unless he is a very great devotee that the Supreme Lord eats it away all. That's even better. Otherwise, at least if the Lord accepts it and leaves back, we at least get to have this sweet rice. And we also, if you are traditionally cooking in a wooden fire, you also get ashes. And you can use those ashes from using the firewood for the sake of cleaning utensils and various other cleaning purposes. At least traditionally, even when I grew up, we used to use that at my place also. That you use it for washing uh, utensils specifically. And I know maybe those who grew up in India would know. And then there are soaps that started coming as washing soaps, various different soaps started coming, but before they used to use this ashes that is produced from cooking. So coming back to the analogy, Srila Jiva Goswami says how cooking the sweet rice, the main purpose was to for the pleasure of Krishna, and the jiva's pleasure is a byproduct, and the ashes, the jiva's pleasure of enjoying the sweet rice is a secondary thing, is a natural byproduct, and then getting ashes to actually clean the containers is even later, is even a lesser kind of a byproduct. Similarly, in the process of bhakti yoga, we engage in devotion service, hearing and chanting for the pleasure of Krishna. The more our heart is pure, Krishna enjoys it, and because we are giving pleasure to Krishna, we become happy, and in the whole process our material bondage also disappears. So Jiva Goswami says, no one goes to do cooking, making sweet rice for the sake of producing ashes. So you look around and see, oh, there is no ash for washing containers, let me make some sweet rice today. No, nobody does that. You may boil water, but you may not cook a sweet rice, if at all you needed ashes for washing containers. But I'm just saying, so Jiva Goswami says that how no one engages in this process of making sweet rice for the sake of ashes. Similarly, in the process of bhakti yoga, we don't engage in it for the sake of liberation from material bondage. That is a side product. That is why it is called Uttama Bhakti. When the devotion service, when the purpose is just pleasure for Krishna, ज्ञानाभिलाषित शून्यम ज्ञान कर्माद्य अनावृतम आनुकूल्येन कृष्णानुशीलनम bhakti uttama. So that bhakti is called uttama because it has no other purpose than for the pleasure of Krishna, done favorably for the pleasure of Krishna in active service mode, without the coverings of jnana and karma. Whereas here in this particular chapter, we are going to see a process called as Bhakti Mishra Gyan. That means this process is called Jnana Yoga, but this is not just Jnana Yoga, Kevala Jnana Yoga. It is not Kevala Jnana, it is Bhakti Mishra Jnana. That means the practitioner has the understanding that there is a Supreme Lord and he worships him. He has some devotional attitude. He does not consider himself God like the general Kevala Jnanis. Rather, he has an understanding of the Supreme Lord being the Supreme, and then he has some understanding of him being the soul. And by engaging in the process of Ashtanga Yoga with some elements of devotional service, he achieves his liberation. Because this Ashtanga Yoga specifically and externally takes shelter of bhakti to achieve its goal. That's why it is called as Bhakti Mishra Gyan. Specifically, here it is Bhakti Mishra Gyana. There also can be Bhakti Mishra Yoga. This chapter is going to be little off Bhakti Mishra Yoga or Gyana. So if anybody else has any questions at this point about this point that I discussed, I primarily tried to discuss the difference between Bhakti, Jnana and Yoga, and in their attitude, in relation to the achievement of liberation from material bondage. And I also described what is this term Bhakti Mishra Gyan. There is something called as Jnana Mishra Bhakti, but this is different. This is Bhakti Mishra Gyan. The process is Jnana, but it takes the shelter of Bhakti to achieve the end of Jnana. If the main process is Bhakti, but the devotee has some traces of the Jnana process, then that becomes Jnana Mishra Bhakti. Bhakti is very primary, Jnana is a trace. But here Jnana is primary, Bhakti is a trace. So that is why it is Bhakti Mishra Gyan. So if anybody has any questions in this, we can ask, otherwise we can take it, otherwise we can go ahead. Okay. And this particular chapter is the answer to the question of Devahuti asked in chapter 25. She asked about Jnana process. So that is what we have been discussing from the last chapter. However, in this last chapter, we just saw what is the analysis of material nature. We saw the fundamental principles of material nature. But here we are trying to see understanding material nature. The title is quite interesting because what do you mean by understanding material nature? What happens when you understand material nature? The real and when a person understands material nature really, that means he learns to get out of the material nature. He actually becomes determined to get out of the material nature, which is the process of liberation. So liberation from material bondage is the real understanding of material nature. So instead of titling this chapter as liberation from material bondage, which is the topic, if you see the whole chapter is driven towards liberation from material nature. Whereas Srila Prabhupada very interestingly names it as understanding material nature, because no Jnani can say, I understand the material nature and remains stuck to it. If anyone understands the material nature really, they will make efforts to actually be free from the material nature. So I found it interesting that how Srila Prabhupada says this as understanding material nature. Somebody has raised hands. Shuman Prabhu?
Prabhu, my voice is not so clear. I just wrote in the chat.
Oh, okay. Uh, what did you write in the chat? Oh, okay, sorry. What is Jnana process, yoga or impersonalism in Jnana Mishra Bhakti? When you're asking, when you say Jnana Mishra Bhakti, what do you mean by Jnana Mishra Bhakti? Is that Jnana is a yoga or impersonalism? I
You
don't
kind
think
of said something there, Bhakti is little bit mixed with Gyan or something.
that
So,
Jnana,
what is that Gyan?
yeah, that Jnana is yoga or impersonalistic Jnana you are asking.
Is it like Ashtanga Yoga, that kind of thing, or impersonalism? What is that Gyan? Analytical
You can
study?
ask this question: is Bhakti Mishra Gyan different from Jnana Mishra Bhakti? Yes, that I explained. I think there is a difference, because in Bhakti Mishra Gyan, Jnana is the primary process, Bhakti is like in trace. Whereas in Jnana Mishra Bhakti, Bhakti is the main process, Jnana is in trace. Let me explain to you the question. Let me ask the question again to you so that I am clear. You are asking, if when you call Jnana Mishra Bhakti, that means there is a trace of Jnana in the process of Bhakti. Is that trace is of yoga or impersonalism?
Yes, because otherwise in Bhakti we also have other Jnana, which is Bhakti Gyan. So
Mhm.
that cannot be because anavritam, right? Not so.
Yes. So if you read the NOD, different commentaries on NOD also, that jnana is not bhakti jnana. That knowledge about, then otherwise there will be no means the scriptures and the commentaries will itself will not, means there is no need to write them if it is jnana and if it is covering bhakti. What covers in terms of jnana mishra bhakti is the attitude of the devotee. If he is coming from a strong renunciation mode, if he has a very detrimental mood towards material nature in terms of virakti, and if that virakti actually kind of creates a trace in his attitude, a kind of a what do you call, a kind of a negative attitude towards material nature or anything like that, instead of having a real vairagya, that is yukta vairagya, if his vairagya is kind of artificial, then that artificial vairagya is coming from a place of jnana. Actually, it's a wrong understanding of the material nature, because he feels this world is something that is like demonizing the world is a primary like quality of jnana yoga process, because you create so much disgust so that you want to get out of it. But here, when a devotee does not see the material nature as a disgusting or demonizing it, he sees it in its original nature in relation to Krishna, and he tries to deal with it cautiously in his practicing stage. And in the perfect stage, he engages, also he engages it in Krishna's service in the practicing stage, and ultimately in the perfected stage, he started seeing stavara jangama deke na deke taramurti, means when he is in a perfected state, he only sees Krishna everywhere.
So, Prabhu, just one final quick thing.
Mhm.
Jnana, whether it is Bhakti Mishra Gyan or Jnana Mishra Bhakti, what does the word Jnana means? Analytical study, like Sankhya?
It's not analytical study or Sankhya. Here, when you say Jnana Mishra Bhakti, that is mainly the attitude,
Okay, and
which is
what about Bhakti Mishra Gyan? What is that Gyan?
that that jnana is the original jnana process of jnana, where it is sankhya. The person is, if you will
Okay.
see what does that mean in from verses 6 to 11 in this chapter.
Okay. So
That
it
jnana
is
is actually the
Sankhya.
proper jnana process, but there is an attitude of like the aspect of devotional yoga mixed with it. It's properly practicing ashtanga yoga, it is properly practicing like sankhya, doing analysis of the matter and all these things.
Isn't Ashtanga Yoga and Sankhya different or both are same?
Ashtanga yoga, Sankhya yoga, Jnana yoga, they all have some things in common and some differentiation also. Like
Okay.
Sankhya is actually Jnana process. Ashtanga yoga is also an advanced stage of Jnana process only. So sometimes you see Jnana and yoga mixed. When if you see karma, Jnana and bhakti, sometimes we just address these three. That means the yoga aspect is merged into the Jnana there.
Yes, Prabhu, thank you. Please carry on.
So, so beginning the chapter, there are 30 verses, and basically in this chapter we are going to see the jiva. In the beginning of the chapter, we are going to see how the jiva in a conditioned state, and at the end of the chapter, we will see how that jiva from a conditioned state can become a liberated yogi. So that process is what we are going to discuss in this whole chapter. If you see the first section, it is a jiva in the conditioned state. What is this consciousness? And when he practices the bhakti mishra gyan, he can finally become a liberated yogi. That is being the, and the qualities of that liberated yogi. Who is that liberated yogi? How he gets liberation is explained in the end of the chapter. So in between, it's the process to go from being a conditioned jiva to becoming a liberated yogi. And we will see that process. That process is here called as Bhakti Mishra Gyan. As I'm again explained previously, Jnana is the primary process, but this particular process is taking the help of the devotional service in some ways. That is why it is called as Bhakti Mishra Gyan. And so let's jump into the chapter before it is too late. I hope everybody is able to see my screen. Yes?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Thank you. So verses 1 to 5 speaks about the jiva in the conditioned state. So the jiva is, although means even though it is situated in the prakriti or in the material nature, it's still spiritual. The spiritual nature of the jiva is not lost. We probably had a discussion about this towards the last week. In the beginning of the chapter 26 also we had a similar discussion. So jiva, even in the conditioned state, does not lose its spiritual nature. It does not change in nature, but he is unable to unleash his full potential as a soul. And that's what was being explained in this particular section, where the cause of the conditioning of the jiva is actually the false identification with prakriti. Because the spiritual jiva, when becomes absorbed in the material nature, three modes of material nature, in the Bhagavad Gita also it is said, पुरुषः प्रकृतिस्थो हि भुङ्क्ते प्रकृति जान गुण कारणं गुणसंगस्य सदसद योनि जन्मसु. Purushah prakritisto hi. Purusha is the jiva, the soul here. Purusha prakritisto hi. When he becomes prakritista, means when he becomes situated in material nature. And what does he do in the material nature? Bhungte prakriti jan guna. He enjoys, he tries to enjoy. He cannot actually enjoy. He tries to enjoy the modes of material nature. And because of that, karanam guna sangasya, he develops guna sangha. He develops attachment to the material modes. He develops bondage to the material nature. Sadasad yoni janmashu. What happens? He takes birth in good and bad species of life. So, and that is the reason is his identification with the material nature, being falsely thinking that he is this body and he is the proprietor of everything. So it's a nice dose of knowledge for us to hear, because we continue to hear many times that how we are not this body, we are spirit souls. We should not have the attitude of proprietorship of everything that we own. We should not falsely think that we are this body and everything that belongs to the body is mine. It's a good dose of knowledge on a daily basis to contemplate on it. It's there is a ladder of there is a ladder where you see sometimes life from a bigger perspective, and sometimes you have to get into the details of the life. So it's good for devotees when they are engaging in devotional activities like chanting, hearing, reading. They actually see life from a bigger perspective, especially when they are trying to chant. They see from a life from a bigger perspective. In that time, we have to think that surely life is temporary. Anytime I can die, and I need to take shelter. This is the only reality in life. At least while chanting, we need to think that this is the only reality in life that actually matters. However, the real connection with Krishna, when it manifests in our daily activities, it manifests with maturity that yes, ultimately everything is temporary, but today I have certain duties while living in this world. How do I do it in a Krishna conscious way? So, seeing life from a bigger perspective does not make us irresponsible, rather, it makes us attentive both while doing the spiritual activities and focused when we are doing other activities related to our lives. So, so here, seeing this particular section is going to see the jiva from a bigger perspective of that how the jiva is conditioned, and then it's going to present the process for overcoming that condition. So the solution is given right in this particular section in the fifth verse. Uh, Kapil Dev says, to overcome the transmigration, this rotating in the cycle of birth and death, to overcome the doer mentality, which is the cause of that, and to overcome this contamination that is happening, even though the soul is spiritual, the contamination that's happening because of the situation in the material nature for the soul. The solution to get out of that is to gradually control the materially attached mind, gradually control the materially attached mind through the combination of bhakti, yoga, and detachment. All the three are utilized here. So you cannot jump on me saying, or hey, why only not bhakti? But because this section is specifically describing bhakti, mishra, jnana. So as I explained to Shuman Prabhu, you may see the word jnana, but the process of yoga is involved because they all kind of have a blurry borders. They all kind of go hand in hand in their execution. In certain aspects they are differentiated, in certain aspects they are all combined together. So the next section, I hope this is clear so far. And if you are electronically raising your hands, I'm sorry, somehow I cannot actually figure that out, because only when I click on the participants I can see if somebody is raising the hands, but I'm not generally having the participants open, so I don't know anything that's going on. So the best thing is to for you to just unmute yourself and ask me, or you can put it in a chat box. So verses 6 to 11 is titled as Attaining Liberation by the Process of Yoga or Jnana Mishra Bhakti. So here in this particular section, we see the process for liberation, which is a combination, as we heard in the fifth verse, is a combination of Ashtanga Yoga, hearing about the Supreme Lord, and having faith in the Supreme Lord. And also, there are different 18 qualities that are to be cultivated by the Gyanis, and then the characteristics of the super soul are mentioned in verse 11. So in the process of in the process which is explained in the sixth verse, it's a combination of Ashtanga Yoga. We all know Ashtanga Yoga has 8 limbs. So all those limbs are practiced starting from Yama, Niyama. And then with the devotion and faith, the Jnani is supposed to understand that the Supreme Lord is real, that he exists. And with faith, he is supposed to hear the topics about the Supreme Lord. He's supposed to engage in hearing about the Supreme Lord. And then he is also supposed to develop these 18 qualities like Sarva Bhuta Samatva, that means equality to all jivas, equality towards all living entities. Nirvaira, no enmity. Aprasanga, no intimate connections with especially the opposite sex. Brahmacharya, which is celibacy. Mauna, he is supposed to be grave, he is supposed to maintain silence. This silence is not the Krishna conscious understanding of silence. This silence is real silence. Real means in the sense just physical silence. Swadharmena baliyasa means he has to offer the results of his activities to the Supreme Lord. So there is supposed to be karmarpana. Even though he does not work, he is a jnani, he has renounced all his activities. But even the activities of controlling senses and hearing about Krishna and all these things needs to be considered as work, and they must be offered. The results of that must be offered to the Supreme Lord. Yadrichaya upalabdena santushto. He's supposed to be satisfied with what comes of its own accord. Mitabhuk, he should be regulated in his eating. Munihi, he is thoughtful. Vivikta Sharanaha, he lives in a secluded place. Shanta, peaceful. If you hear this, many of these things are repeated even in Bhagavad Gita in various places where either the qualifications of Gyanis come or the general qualifications like the process of knowledge. Vivikta Desha Sevitvam. Comes in the process of knowledge also. Shantaha, peaceful. Maitraha, friendly. Karuna, compassionate. So you see, he's supposed to live alone and he is supposed to be friendly. So why there is a need if he is supposed to, if he's living alone, living in a secluded place or living alone, whom he is supposed to be friendly? There are going to be living entities in the forest, and he is not supposed to be fearful. He can be friendly only when he is fearless. Karuna, compassionate. Self-possessed or determined, Atmavan, he is actually determined in what he has taken up. Sanubandhe cha dehe asmin akurvam asadagraham. No bodily identification, because that is the main problem. So he doesn't engage in too much bodily identification or attraction for bodily relationships. He doesn't create new bodily relationships while going to the forest and engaging in this process. And he also jnanena drushta tattvena. Jnanena drushta tattvena means he looks at the world with the eyes of knowledge, and through that eyes of knowledge he tries to understand prakriti purushasya cha. He looks at prakriti, that is material nature, purushasya, seeing oneself. Nirvritta buddhi avasthano, he becomes realized about the knowledge of spirit and matter by transcending the three stages of material consciousness, and he sees the reality of the material nature, the soul, and the super soul. Duri Bhutanya Darshanaha, being aloof from all other conceptions of life. He doesn't take any other things, other isms, so called isms, which may be very necessary in the particular context of life. But for him, after having gone to forest, certain of those isms like nationalism or political activism or in general social activism, all these things becomes, these conceptions he keeps aside because there needs to be a certain level of bodily identification while engaging with in these things. Atmadrik, self-realized. So when he develops all these qualities, plus he practices Ashtanga yoga, and he engages in hearing about the Supreme Lord, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. And when he does all these things, gradually he becomes more and more disentangled from the bondage of material nature. And then by engaging in this process, what he realizes, he does not realize himself as God, as sometimes Mayavadis may say. He does not engage in this process of developing these 18 qualities and understand that finally, oh, I am God and I am everywhere and I am everything, I am that Brahman. No, he does not become like that. Rather, it is very clear here. He realizes the super soul as the one without a second. He understands how the super soul is pervading into everything. He understands how the super soul is the revealer of the material elements. He understands how the super soul is the cause of Prakriti, material nature. And he also understands how the Supreme Lord even manifests within himself as Paramatma. And he is also even in everything, including his own false ego. So he relinquishes his false ego but adapts the real ego of being the servant of the Supreme Lord. Not to the extent of what a devotee thinks, but at least he has some understanding that he is not God, but there is a supreme Lord who is above him, and he realizes him as Paramatma. So if there are any questions at this stage, we can take,
Prabhu, I have one question.
please.
Prabhu, you mentioned in the material, uh, s- for a jiva, spiritual nature is never lost. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned spiritual nature is never lost. So, spiritual nature, as per my understanding, is that Sachitanand Swarupa.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm trying to understand that when in a material condition, we have a soul
Mm-hmm.
which is covered by subtle body, which is mind, intelligence, ego, and the gross body, which is the five senses. So, can you please explain it? What do you mean when you say spiritual nature is not lost? Are you trying to say that we still have that spiritual body? What actually it is?
Okay. So the question is, when I say the soul cannot be touched by matter, the spiritual quality of the soul cannot be touched by matter, and still the soul is experiencing all the miseries of the material existence. What is not touched? What is that spiritual nature of the soul that is not touched? That's what is the question, right?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So as you rightly said, the original form, the original qualities, the original activities of the soul in its true sense is all in a very seed format within us. So that's why it is said Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kapunoi Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karaya Uday. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema. Krishna Prema, love of God is Nitya Siddha. That perfection is already within us. There is nothing that we have to get from outside. We already have the ability to love Krishna. Srila Prabhupada mentions in the Nectar of Devotion preface that a child has the ability to walk intrinsically. That is why, as he grows, he catches hold of the wall and he starts walking. He can do that only when he has an ability to walk. So the ability is already there, the practice comes. Similarly, for the soul, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema, Sadhya Kapanoi, by engaging in the process of Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karayodaya, it is aroused, which is aroused. That real love for God is gradually awakened. That's why it is called dormant. That's why Srila Prabhupada also mentions in his famous explanation of what is Hare Krishna chanting. He says, this Hare Krishna chanting is not an artificial imposition of on one's mind. It's a natural thing, being a servant of Krishna. So similarly, coming back to your question specifically, what is not affected is this spiritual nature of the soul, being able to be a servant of Krishna. That is not affected. And in its original sana glory, it can manifest a form, it can also engage in a particular service, but all those things are currently in a seed format, and they cannot be covered, they cannot be destroyed, they cannot be completely taken away from the soul, because that is its intrinsic nature. Did I answer your question?
Yes. So, Prabhu. So, when you say spiritual nature is never lost, you are trying to say that the intrinsic quality of a soul to love Krishna, or
And
the
so
ability to love and serve Krishna, is present. It is just in the dormant state. We need to work on it so it is aroused gradually.
yes,
That's okay. Got it, Prabhu.
it is prema, but it has
Mhm.
now become kama.
Okay.
But the
In, in,
transformation doesn't mean the prema is fully, the ability to love is like now covered. Gradually it can be aroused.
okay, Prabhu. Got it. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. It's a nice question. So what is the time? Okay, 7:40 and 20 minutes. So in this section, verse 12 to 13, we are going to understand how to understand the presence of soul and super soul, because now in this
So
last, Hare Krishna.
yeah, another very short question is, we see they're already developing all these qualities. So after this, when they come to bhakti, they just go very quickly till they don't have to go to anathanaviti and all those, because already they have practiced and got all these qualities in hand. which looks like very highly developed qualities in a life of a devotee also.
Yes. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na shochati na kankshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param.
That is like Uttamanikari stage, right? Almost. Just bhakti is missing.
Bhakti is missing, but believe me, the attitude of being a servant of Krishna or understanding or accepting Krishna as the master, even theoretically, is no joke. It has come by the grace of Guru and Krishna. That is the seed which has been sown. Even though we are eternally servants, for us to come to that realization has taken a lot of kicks from the material nature. So, in one sense, when you come to it, it does not matter how long it took, but ultimately, yeah, as you're saying, it's much better to come into the association of a pure devotee. And even if you are a neophyte, even we are like neophytes, it's better to start the process of bhakti yoga directly than going by the other route, because it takes more klesho adhikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukkham dehavad viravapyate. Krishna says, what is the best process? The best process is actually being worshipping the Supreme Lord in his personal form and being surrendered to him. Between these two processes, and after a long time of practice, if a person is uh, actually fortunate and gets the association of a devotee, just imagine he has to hear from about the Supreme Lord. Where is he going to hear from if he is not having a devotee association? So ultimately, it is the association of that devotee that is going to actually give him the effects and the future devotional life. All his yoga practice is all like a buffer. That hearing part is the real medicine that is going to work. If it really works and changes him, he can become a bhakti yogi also. But the fortune that we need to really appreciate what that we have is like the opportunity to directly engage in devotional service.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah, I didn't. You didn't ask me a question. I just elaborated on your point. Thank you. You wanted to say anything on what I said?
No, Prabhu, thank you. I kind of understand that
Yeah.
because that process fall down is very easy. It's very difficult also
Yeah,
to
true.
reach that platform
Mm.
as the Shastras describe.
Yes.
But I was just thinking that if one had reached that, then just with the association of a devotee can quickly
Can be
transcend
quicker.
after.
It can be quicker, but it can have its challenges.
Okay. Extra renunciation problem.
Extra renunciation. Yeah, that is where that is. Sometimes it is said that jnana mishra, that attitude comes from there. Processes may not be still there, but the attitude comes from there. So, how does he inference the presence of soul and super soul? Here, a clear analogy is given. How the uh, sun in the sky is reflected on water, and then the water is reflected on the wall. And when we look at the wall, we can clearly say that there is sun. Even though we are not directly looking at the sun, we are looking at the reflection of the water on the wall. Still, we can see there is sun because it's all happening because of the presence of the sun. So, similarly, the jiva can be covered by the three ahankar, and then can be present within the body, mind and senses, the cage. Still we can infer the presence of the jiva because they are all not, all these other elements are not actually animate. They don't have consciousness. That's what we saw in the previous chapter, understanding the fundamental principles of material nature. That's why we saw last week what is different senses, the subtle senses, what is mind, how all the matter is coming, where it is coming from. We saw all those sankhya, we saw all those analysis, because they did not have animate consciousness. None of them they are all matter. So by looking at all of this sankhya, a person can understand the presence of jiva. Similarly, he can infer the presence of the Supreme Lord through the energy of the Supreme Lord that is reflected in everything that we see. And through that, he can infer the presence of the Lord also. So, in this way, he knows this presence of soul and the super soul. and then he can uncover the material coverings, that he understands that the soul is pure and it is alert and free from false ego, and in this way gradually he can appreciate that how, even though he appears to be covered by the false ego and its products like mind and senses, the soul is really pure. Because he understands the soul is really pure in its original state, he gets the impetus to achieve that state. So when he is attempting that disappearance of false ego can sometimes give him some distress, a feeling of, oh, I may be losing. However, the more he realizes that he is a pure individual soul by mature understanding, he will wake up to the reality of being free from the false ego. So once the first stage is understanding that I am pure, some understanding that I am pure, and we engage in the process and try to give up the false ego, it can be a little painful. It can be actually extremely painful to become humble. Trinadapi Sunichena is not a very easy thing for devotees also. So here this Jnani may try to give up his false ego, but it can be very painful. But how does he overcome that? By developing more and more mature understanding about the purity of the individual soul, he can wake up to that reality of being free from false ego. In that way, he can gradually remove his material coverings. And then Devahuti is asking, okay, you're saying that the soul, by its own efforts, by its own contemplation, that's why this process is called jnana. Even though he had hearing about the Supreme Lord, that is was only one word in this whole process. But Ashtanga Yoga was discussed in so many verses. And now the process of uncovering the material coverings is also given through contemplation. Jnana is given more emphasis, is more emphasized more. So that's why here Devahuti is asking Kapil Dev, since Prakriti and Jiva are so much connected to each other, how is it that the Jiva is ever going to give up his attraction for the Prakriti? How is the liberation? See, first of all, I'm attached. If I am attached, why will I give my attachment? Because even if I fear bondage, I may get relaxed, and my attraction to the material nature can reappear. So because the prakriti is still there and the jiva is going to be still there in this world, so how is it that that does not recur? So then Kapil Dev is going to explain how that process of liberation works. He says one has to practice intense bhakti for a long time. Tivra bhakti achiram. His process of execution of bhakti also should be very intense. And then he has to also practice knowledge and renunciation. He has to actually engage in animitta nimittena. He has to engage, offer all the fruits of his activities, or engage in activities without desiring its fruit. In that way, he has to be renounced and perfectly knowledge. He has to engage in austerity, yoga, and self immersion. That is Atma Samadhina. He has to be focused on the soul and the super soul. So, in this way, by seriously practicing, one can overcome the influence of Prakriti over Jiva gradually. He says the example of you start a fire using the wood, firewood, and it produces heat, it cooks something. At the end, the very fire which the wood helped to start, because of the fire, the wood will be consumed. Similarly, the mind, which is engaged in this process, which is used as an instrument to engage in this process of bhakti, yoga, and jnana, will be consumed by the very process which it actually was used to perform. So, like the wood is consumed by the fire, even though the fire was produced from through the wood. Similarly, the mind, which was utilized to practice the process of bhakti, yoga, and jnana in this case, will be consumed, will be purified, will be cleansed by this very same process. And then Kapil Dev says how seeing the faults of the Prakriti and gradually knowing more and more truth. With his mind fixed on the Lord, he becomes situated in the self. You see how very nicely combined all this process. He see the faults of Prakriti, that is Jnana. He knows the truths, that is Jnana. His mind is fixed on the Lord, that is Bhakti, and this is also Samadhi, which is Yoga. And then he rejoices in the self. So it's a combination of bhakti, yoga, and knowledge, jnana. So with all these three folk combined, he actually comes to a stage where the material nature cannot actually bewilder him. So Kapil Dev says, for the question asked by Devahuti, that how come the jiva can overcome material nature, how the attraction of for the material nature can be overcome, he says, by engaging in the process, even though he is situated in the material nature, he can come to a place where the material nature can no longer or can no longer be effective. Why is Kapil Dev not directly recommending take up bhakti process directly instead of going through karma, jnana, etc.? Even in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna goes through all these yogas. Even if someone is doing some anga of bhakti or chanting one round, isn't it better than going through karma, jnana, and yoga? Because there are practitioners of various inclinations, and he's particularly answering a question by the Devahuti, because his first choice in the chapter 25 was bhakti yoga. He was very clear about it. He compared and also said that bhakti is the superior process, but still there are going to be people who will be having those inclinations for karma, jnana, and yoga. So that is why bhakti is introduced as a small element to bring them back, because the Vedic alternative is a broad structure. It's a broad structure. So first, there is pure bhakti. If you are fortunate enough to take in the association of a devotee and directly practice bhakti, that is true. But otherwise, there is a option of being an atheist, but that is no option actually. Then there is option of doing just kevala karma, kevala jnana, kevala yoga, but that is also not so good. All these practices need some element of bhakti in it. So you can practice karma yoga, which technically becomes karma mishra bhakti in an advanced stage. In the beginning stage, it could be bhakti mishra karma, and then gradually it can become karma mishra bhakti, and then finally become bhakti yoga. The same for jnana and yoga also. So gradually try to introduce some bhakti. It's like the Vaman Dev, that small bhakti will take more, expand. If you are fortunate, it will take everything. But we need the association of devotees in each stage to be pushed. But the best thing is, of course, bhakti yoga, directly taking up the process of devotion service through the association of a devotee. Still, the world is a contains a lot of variety of people. So all these processes are pushing the person towards bhakti. So recommending them in some aspects is not completely out of touch, because Krishna has a whole plan. So yeah, as you're saying, there is some Mishra Bhakti is better than no Bhakti. It's much better than being an atheist. Of course, you cannot compare it with the process of Bhakti, and it's not that we are recommending it, but something is better than nothing kind of a concept. Here, he's specifically trying to explain a particular process. So in this way, when he engages in self-realization for many times with complete detachment and bhakti, and by Lord's mercy, he attains liberation. Just notice, many lifetimes. Gradually, he achieves liberation. So in this way, he completes the process of Bhakti Mishra Jnana. So if there are any questions, we can take. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.